Hi, my friend. Thank you for joining me for this last part of our four-part series between Anna and I. We have talked about and covered so many different aspects when it comes to podcasting. We've talked about analytics. We've talked about visibility. We've talked about strategy. We've talked about mindset. And I know that if you haven't listened to the entire series, I know that you actually will gain a lot of information throughout our 4 episodes together. And this episode, you will learn a lot as well. Today's conversation is going to focus on setting your podcast up to take a break and to take a step back, which I think is really key given the holidays are just around the corner. As at the time of recording this, at the time of this going live, the holidays are around the corner, but these tips are invaluable for being able to take a break and take a step back anytime throughout the year. So whether it's the holidays, whether you just want a mental health break, or whether you just want to go on a season break, this is the episode for you to help you get ready, to help you get your content prepared, and to help you get your message aligned so that you can stay visible even while taking a step back. So Anna is an incredible human being. She is the founder and CEO of the podcast space, is a multilingual award-winning professional with experience in global podcasting and a heart for impact-driven entrepreneurs. Her superpower is the ability to help clients identify a podcast idea that accelerates their business or professional goals, establishes trust with their ideal clients, and avoids content creator overwhelm. So before we get into this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could share this episode with another creator that you know needs to hear it, and or share it on social media and tag us to let us know that you're listening. And if you really want to make my day, maybe leave us a rating or a review, 5 stars if you love it, and let us know how this content has impacted you and has helped you. And I don't know, I think it's just such a beautiful gift to share what we like and what we enjoy from other people's content. We don't always get to hear it, so I would be so grateful. So let's get into our conversation with Anna today. And thank you for joining us for 4 parts of our series together. Anna, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining me for our very last episode on our series together. I can't believe how quickly time has flown by, and I'm actually really sad about it because I really love talking to you.
I know. I feel like I'm like, let's continue this. Let's do a marathon.
Let's do a marathon. How many episodes can we create in a 24-hour period? No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
I love that.
No, I'm super excited to be here, for you to have me. I guess like I say normally, I'm so excited to have you that I'm like that default.
Exactly. And you're like, this is wonderful. I love that. Okay, what we're talking about today is one of the biggest reasons why I was like thinking about all the amazing creators that I know. And I was like, Anna needs to come onto the podcast because she just did something really cool that most podcasters try and do and honestly can't really do, is take a step back for the summer. And I feel like people can't take a step back. Actually, before I say what I think, I want to know what you think. Why do you think that people find it really hard to take a step back with their podcast for the summertime and be like not creating and producing content the whole summer?
Well, I think that there's a lot of fear. These are fear-driven decisions because people, and again, granted, the data does say that. Like, if you're a smaller creator, taking a few months off does decrease your reach when you restart, because people, maybe they replaced you with other podcasts. Maybe they just like are in a different season of life, or maybe they're just like slow to getting back to the topic. And so basically you have to do a different strategy in order to re-engage that community. It's not impossible. It's just like, for most people, it's not as easy. But we're going to talk about like strategies and how I've done it, because something really funny happened while I was gone, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Okay.
But I think,
but I want to add in, I need to add in something to this too, though. I think also people don't plan their time properly, and people in general are producing their podcasts on a week-to-week basis and don't have a system and structure in place in order to allow them to do that. Would you agree?
Yes. And don't you have something that you actually created to help people?
I do. I was going to drop
Plug
it,
that
but I was
in,
like,
girl.
do I do it? Okay, let me plug it. It's called Podcast Manager in a Box. And it is literally my entire project management system for managing your podcast. And within my agency and within my podcasts, we are months ahead. Like where you and I are filming this right now, I have clients who are already recorded through like the end of November, beginning of December. And recorded, nice. And we're in the process of editing and creating content for. So I think it's really key to look at your systems and your processes and how can you optimize and how can you streamline things. So This is like a one-time purchase and you get access to everything that I've created in terms of systems and processes, and also all of my resources and access to my membership community as well. So there's a fun little plug there. You can check it out in the show notes.
Yes, honestly, like I was like, I think you have this a little bit of the solution here. So let's.
At the end of the podcast episode, that's the solution. Thank you all for joining today.
Yes, like goodbye. Thank you, Anna, for doing the free pro to make that segue. No, but I think that I totally agree with you. People get so overwhelmed and so burned out because a lot of times they're overcomplicating things, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I do agree that a lot of people don't want to leave because they're like, if I stop the podcast, I know this is such like a wonky machine that if I stop, I'll be like, oh my God, I do not want to restart this. And so they fear that they may stop the podcast and may not come back. I've heard it from people. And I was like, surely there's an in-between. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people are just like too afraid to stop the show.
I agree completely. So, okay, where should we begin with this topic? You took a sabbatical this summer and you took time away, and your podcast went off without a hitch. You just continue to have content on there. So what were some key steps that you needed to take in order to be able to do that successfully?
Yes. So what I did before I went on, a month sabbatical, and I took a sabbatical from the podcast and the business as well. So I looked at how much time do I have before I leave? 2 weeks. How much am I snowing in client work? Which, by the way, I forced my clients to take a sabbatical with me. I was like, we're getting ready. I'm taking a break. You're taking a break. And so I actually didn't only develop one strategy for me. And every year I do this. Last year was 2 weeks. This year was more. And so I devised a strategy for me and the client. And so, because, every other client is more like on a one-off, but that client has been with me for about 3 years now. So basically I decided, okay, how much time do I have available? Knowing that I normally do my podcast in video format, do I have the capacity to do that? And so I was like, absolutely not. I do have a whole episode where I break down the 15 considerations that you must go through before launching a video podcast, because there's so much that you need to consider. And so listen to that as well. So when you're looking at it from the perspective of like capacity, isn't just doing the episode, is researching. Sometimes you have to rehearse the intros and outros, how the episode is going to flow, how much time you will have to schedule that on the website, all of that, right? And creating promotional content for the podcast, because what's the point of having content if you're not telling anyone about it? So I looked at all of that. Also, then I looked, okay, I want to do audio podcast episodes. Okay, I want to make it themed so it makes sense because I'm doing something different. So I used ChatGPT to come up with like a title of the season to make it fun. And so I came up with ChatGPT, and I came up with a Summer Spark series. So it has it rolls off the tongue very well. It sparks, so it ignites. And the idea was, if you're working or not working on your podcast, have me in your ears and I'll have different takes on podcasting. It's going to be shorter. It's going to be things that don't take a lot of time of my capacity to research and don't need to create a lot of complex elements and stuff like that. My podcast itself is very simple. I have an intro, I have a sound effect, and then I have the whole episode structured, and I ad-lib the beginning and end. So there's minimal editing points in there. I don't add a lot of elements. And so I was like, I'm not doing ask me, because that included me having to ask, collect the questions, think about the topics. So I was like, what are the things that I can talk about right away that I can, if someone stopped me on the street, I would talk about, that can be inspirational, that can be practical. One of the episodes was nine places that will give your podcast immediate visibility. And that episode performed super well because I was like, that's something that I always get, practical. And I can riff off. By the way, I used a social media post that I had created years ago to talk about that. So I actually repurposed old content from a different platform.
Love that.
So I was like, okay, that sounds doable. And then it went out I did not, in terms of newsletters, I sent out 2 newsletters a week. For that month, I was like, absolutely not. I'm going to send an automatic newsletter that goes out when the episode is out.
Love it.
And if I have, listeners coming through there, great. If they unsubscribe, I don't care. I don't have the capacity to do all of this, but it's like the bare minimum, the MVP that I can do. So I
Yeah.
looked at the minimum viable product that I could create for that month. Because, by the way, I took a sabbatical because I was burnt out. I was tired. And so I was like, I'm not going to literally burn out before I take my sabbatical,
Yeah,
right?
no.
So I looked at my capacity and I thought, how can I still honor my commitment to my listeners? And it doesn't need to be like a video podcast with a lot of stuff. Like, how can I deliver really good stuff, things that I know they want? Maybe they want to be inspired. Maybe they just want like no-brainer things that they can act on that are not big thinking. Because I looked at this, the kind of like the scene around me, and I was like, okay, taking the listener's shoes, what will they do right after this episode? How will I make them feel? And so the Summer Spark series was brilliant because I was like, okay, I don't want you to go and try to do too many things. But if you want change before the last quarter of the year, here are some things that you need to focus on.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. And you know what? So I was just sitting here and I was looking for a pen because you just jolted my mind as something that I wanted to like remember, because I'm in the process right now of planning some episodes for like the holiday season in order to help people kind of get ahead of their content creation and all that kind of stuff, and like make it valuable and like, what to look forward to in 2024 and like that kind of stuff. And I just think that it's really smart to plan ahead and be structured, and it actually doesn't take as much time as we think it takes. And I think that when we properly block out and like carve out the time in our schedule to sit down and just at least record the episodes, all the stuff can be done afterwards. All the other stuff can be done afterwards. But I think it's also too, exactly like you're saying, prioritizing what's actually important for this episode. I love that you didn't do video because you were like, I'm not going to be able to get, like, it's not going to get done if I do video. And so like, it goes back to that saying of like, done is better than perfect, right? Like, we don't need to have everything so perfect all the time. That if you show up and you are delivering part of your message in a way that needs to be like delivered, then you are helping yourself and you're helping your audience for the future. And so I think that it's just really important to remember that like, it doesn't always have to be perfect, and like, not every single strategy is going to work for every single person, and like, that's totally fine. But making sure that you're developing a strategy that actually works for you in your life, in your week before you're going away. Don't put so much pressure on yourself, right? Like, I think that's just such a great reminder.
And a couple of things that I didn't do were to release episodes that were with big guests that would have required me to go on social media and actually create some engagement and liaising with guests and stuff like that. So I didn't do any guests. I was like, absolutely not going to do that because I could disappoint someone who maybe didn't remember that I was on sabbatical. And so I didn't want to create any work for myself. Something else that I did was I thought about this. I was like, my episodes, like at that point I had already, I think it was like episode number 29 when I started it. And I was like, I've created enough episodes. I could do a replay. I could go and replay old content. I follow so many creators who are like bigger, really big names in the industry. And so every summer they take the summer off. Their team takes the summer off and they do a best of. And like, it was just for me to be like, okay, knowing that I still have so many things to do, I chose not to, but I could have done a replay. But I was like, I think I have the capacity for like creating really short content. And also I looked at the topics. Inspirational content is always a winner. Practical content, like how-tos and stuff, always a winner.
Always.
So I was like, I want to create content that is gonna do something for my business while I'm gone. Like, I wanted to prime people's brains to be like, oh, this is so good. Maybe I want to work with Anna at the end of the, like at the end of the summer or in the beginning of the last quarter of the year. So I did that looking at my podcast goals for the show and to think, what do I want people to do while I'm gone? So
I love that. I love that a lot because I'm sure by listening to all those episodes, I'm sure your email list grew, you know what I mean? And I really do like how you specifically chose not to promote guest episodes during that time because you're right. I think it can do like I feel like when you have like a guest, especially if you have like a big guest on, any guest really, it is doing a disservice to them to like not properly go on and like promote the episode because you were busy or because you weren't there or whatever. It doesn't really leave like a great taste in their mouth because they're like, oh, well, I spent so much, I spent my 40 to 60 minutes recording this with you and gave you some really good information and, all the above. But if you're not going to take the time to promote it and to share about it, then it's kind of like, okay, it doesn't really help the relationship that you might be trying to build with those guests, which of course, like guesting, as we know, if you've listened to the series on guesting on this podcast, you will know that all those little touch points are really, really important. And so again, I think it's kind of about figuring out what your goal is for being off. So like, you have your time off. That's great. What is your goal for all of those episodes while you're off? And then how do you structure the content in a way that supports those goals? I think that is super, super key. And I think that, as creators, we don't always give ourselves the time to take a step back and to analyze it from that perspective. So I really appreciate hearing this because I think it's such a great reminder today.
Yeah, and we always go back to the, I'm going to be gone, therefore, like, my audience is not going to blah, blah, blah. If you set the expectation, and I always say this on my podcast, talk to me on Instagram, tell me your takeaway, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm going to be gone, but please keep, like, write me an email, send me things to social media. I promise I will get back to you once I come back. And I actually had a couple of comments on Spotify for podcasters. There was like 2 messages there. I was like, oh, someone like left me a message. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't think, okay, I'm going to go and nobody's going to listen to my episodes. People were still engaging, and we're going to go there. So basically, while I was gone, my podcast had a 1,200% increase in downloads.
Wow. Why? What do you think it was?
All right. It took me a little while to figure this out.
That's amazing.
So I was like, what is going on? And funny enough, every week I was still logging in just to make sure that my content was coming out and there was no glitch. Because again, even though I'm a professional, I've been doing this for over 10 years.
Yeah.
This can still happen, especially because you're like, I was tired before leaving. Oh my gosh. So I was like,
it just happened to me the other day. Like, it wasn't even anything that we did, but like we had a bunch of client episodes go out on a Wednesday, and none of them were showing up on Apple or Spotify. And I was like, what is going on? And they didn't show up for 24 hours. And I got in contact with all the hosting platforms and I was like, what's the deal? I don't know what the glitch was. Like, they never told me what it was, but if I didn't log in and check, then you don't know if it's gone out or not. So key point, make sure you do that.
Yeah, just in case. Yeah, but I decided to take time away, but I was still like checking, like, initially when I like started, I was like, la, 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 I'll be gone. I'll be taking everything off my phone. I'm not going to look. But then I was like, okay, and then you actually don't have like an assistant. So let's just make sure that things are coming out. And it was really funny because I was like, where is this coming from? Consistently, every day I would get like 100 downloads. And I was like, this is not normal. Like my downloads are more like on the 20 mark. So I was like, this is unusual. And so I started looking and I was like, this is not normal for any scenario that I know of. By the way, if you have a search, this is what is possible. Normally, you can submit your podcast to Apple Podcasts and say, hey, I want to be featured on the new and noteworthy, or just submit me to one of your collections. And I thought, well, maybe someone submitted my podcast, or maybe they found me, whatever. But then I was like, okay, maybe for today, but like for a whole month. And it's funny because I look at my graph
like
and
the spike is probably like insane.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. And so I was like, this is weird. And so I started looking, and basically what happened was because if it happens one day or within 1 week, it could be that your podcast was featured maybe on some big newsletter or some other creator found you and talked, and like maybe they were on a presentation to thousands of people, and like you never know, right? Like you never know the ripple effects of your podcast. And we were talking on the previous episode about how it's really hard to track. And I was like, well, even if my podcast was featured for the whole month on Apple Podcasts, like, this is not very normal. Like, for a whole month, normally that doesn't happen unless you're a really big creator. And so I was like, all right, where is this traffic coming from? And I talk about this because I could be like, all right, I have a 1,200% increase and
No, but you're
stop
like,
there. But
let me investigate this.
yes. And so I was like, one, super excited. But second, I was like, something's don't add up. So basically, my podcast was having, and again, looking into your hosting platform, you look at where your stats are coming from, like geography, like players, and they were coming from iTunes. And I was like,
Okay.
normally it's Apple Podcasts. So I'm like, one, this is weird. Number two, they came from a Windows like operating system.
Oh, interesting.
People who have so
on iOS is for Apple. Yeah, for iTunes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, a podcast movement a few years ago, two separate like presentations that podcast movement were talking about this. So basically, this is bots. So if your podcast is coming from iTunes, which is a platform that normally is phased out for most devices, or it shows Apple Podcasts, it doesn't show any iTunes anymore because iTunes used to include podcasting, but now Apple Podcasts, the app, does that. And so if they're coming from an iTunes platform on a Windows device, and that's when you look at numbers and you look at it analytically, it makes no sense. And therefore, somebody programmed like, bots to run on multiple podcasts. I did not pay for any of this. I don't know how that happened. I still don't understand why that happened. And how I know that this is not correlated to any real people, so these were fake downloads, is because I logged onto Apple Podcasts. Of course, the platform that like is supposed to tell you everything Apple related, and none of that was there.
Right.
None of that.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, so their capacity to filter fake traffic is way higher than most. Or at least like they just knew it. And I was like, I was from the beginning like suspicious of this because it just didn't make any sense. And I was like, if it's just 1 week or 1 day, I would be like, yes, this is organic, awesome. But as I dug more and more, I was like, this doesn't make sense. But what was interesting is that the traffic was coming from the US. So I was like, oh, okay. So there's like all of these. So I was like, am I going to receive 1,000 messages from someone? Because this is very normal on the podcast industry, is that people pay for downloads. And you and I know we receive 1,000 messages of this, like, pay me, $4,000.
I get it on LinkedIn now too.
Oh, it's the worst. So I'm thinking this could be a new strategy. So basically, you as a creator, if you don't know any better, you're like, oh my God, my podcast is taken off. And you're super excited. And then that tanks.
Yeah.
And then you receive one of those messages saying like, oh, you get a taste of what, success could look like.
Yeah.
And then you're more primed to go and pay for that. That's what I'm thinking. It's like a lot of psychology of buying have absolutely zero evidence to back this up, apart from the fact that I'm suspicious. But that's what I think.
I think that is so crazy. I just think that is so crazy. And I also think that it's like, it's cool. And like, I mean, I'm sure you were so excited in the moment. And then also like getting that realization of like, oh, okay, it's just bots. That kind of sucks. But also it skews your data, which is kind of frustrating.
That is the problem that I'm having. I'm looking at that stupid,
and you can't even take it off. Like you can't even remove it.
No, that's the annoying part.
That's frustrating.
And for the upcoming 12 months, I'm going to be seeing that to skew my data. And I always have to remove that data to make decisions. So that's kind of a little bit of a bummer. But it gave me a whole...
Crazy.
I know. But like that's something that I could like, again, my whole branding is about being ethical. And I could have just milked that. Be like, oh my God, a 1,200. Because it was just like right at the time that I went on a sabbatical. And I was like, darn. But
it's like was like watching your account, like waiting for. No, I'm just kidding. They're like, she's not gonna notice.
Right, she's not gonna know. But like, haha, the joke's on you. I'm a detective, and I think it's important to know things like that because not enough people talk about this. They're just like hiding behind data, not having an explanation. Like, or do have the knowledge to dig deeper, like I did. I was like, as soon as September hit, all of that stopped, and so that's why I was like, okay, there were bots.
That's crazy. That's so crazy. I mean, like cool, but like also shitty. Like it's awesome, but it also sucks because it's like, oh, like cool. Like, can it be real though? That would be
Right,
ideal.
exactly. Ooh, is this my new reality? Waking up
Yeah.
to hundreds of downloads? Hell yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
sign me up. But now you know what it feels like, and then it makes you like even more excited to like, go and promote the content and like, do all of that. And like knowing that you can take a step back, I think is super, super key. And it doesn't need to be so stressful all the time, that we can take time off and it can be okay. Like I've done mini sabbaticals from Happiness Happens so many times. One time I did a year-long sabbatical without even realizing it. Like I realized it, but it was not supposed to be that, but I didn't have a plan to come back. And I think that's like another key thing too, is making sure that you have a plan to come back when you are going to do that. Is like, okay, am I going to take a month off? Is it going to be 2 months? Is it going to be 6 months? Or is it going to be a year? What am I going to do? Like, am I going to create new content? Am I not? And so I think that's really important to remember too, is make sure that you have a plan to come back if you're going to do that, because otherwise you find yourself in a spot of like trying to revive like an actually dead feed, and like that's not fun.
Yeah, and it's funny because like I had major brand partnerships that were coming up, and I had to tell them, I was like shaking while I was driving. I was like, I'm going on a sabbatical for a month, and they were all like, "Oh my god, I'm so excited!
Oh, that's nice.
Fun!" And everybody was like, "How was your sabbatical?" Like it actually created excitement around the fact that I was gonna go on a sabbatical, and so many people were like saying that same thing, like, "Are you gonna come back?" And I was like, I am,
Yes.
don't worry, I'm not gonna disappear. But yeah, like there's a difference between creating serialized content where you're actually building up to the return, and doing episodical where you're just like dropping content. And as a small business owners, the majority of the value is there to be top of mind every week. So basically, one of my clients, she's a senior living consultant, and on Christmas Day we had batched like a whole like month of content, because I was like, hey, I want to take some time off. How about we do a similar strategy?
Yeah.
And so we recorded like a lot of episodes. I had them edited, and we recorded something really fun, which was like the Golden Girls, like how to live 2023 as a Golden Girl.
Oh, cute. I love that.
Because the Golden Girls have so much wisdom, and they like, they're all seniors. And so it talks about a lot of similarities with what she talks on the show about, like finding her purpose and, not giving up and not dying on the couch, like having an active life as a senior. And we had all of that. And on Christmas Day, her husband had a series of strokes.
Aww.
And so we had content scheduled all the way to the first week of January. And so we talked, and I was like, hey, how are you feeling? Like, how's things? And she's like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So we worked together to figure out a plan. And so we literally I recorded an episode with her, which I'll send you. We break down a bit more detail in that. But we spent pretty much the whole year running replays. 40% of our content was replays, but her downloads overall increased, I think, maybe 20%, which again, like her podcast is really simple. Like we're not doing anything complicated
but it's still
here.
Amazing. Like you're not even having to redo anything. Like, I mean, like I do this with a couple of clients as well when we need to. I've done it I like 2 or 3, maybe like 3 times, and it works like great. And you get fresh ears on the content, and like people are equally as excited and engaged in it. And I think that that's like a really cool way of shedding light on past conversations. And we just get her to record a separate intro, like a new intro that gets put on the episode, which I don't even think you necessarily need, but like you totally can if you want to. But yeah, we don't have to deep dive into like how replays work or anything like that.
Right.
But I think that's amazing.
And it was really interesting because I kept, and again, what type of professional are you? I think it's important to support your clients above everything else. Like in my head, I was like, there's a 50% chance she's going to say, I need to stop the podcast, which is fine. If for anyone that hasn't like really been close enough with, someone in their family having a stroke, the road to recovery takes months, like a lot. Minimum is 6 months, depending on the severity of your stroke. And so I knew that was going to be like, I needed to support her long term, but I was like, there's a chance that she's going to be like, I cannot think about this. But she was like, I want to continue documenting. Like, I don't want to stop the podcast, because the podcast is like educational, but also like one of the ways that we get, business for her, just again, being top of mind. And so I was like, all right, so tell me, like, as you're there, if you have the capacity, take notes. And we did 2 episodes where she recorded from her like voice memos on her phone, and she recorded it in the ICU in like the room, like with her husband. And it was just such a beautiful, authentic way. But I was like, look, if you don't want to record it, don't record it. Like we can you'll have your notes. We can go over it later. Or if you feel like it's too raw, and sometimes you're just like, I can't talk about it just yet. I was like, okay, I'm going to make a note on our episode ideas and put all of that. So then later we can touch on it.
Yeah.
And so that we literally just used replays, or we did like pivoted the whole podcast more about like caregiving and strategies for caregivers. And we've been getting so many great messages from people who are like, thank you for being authentic. Like you completely changed the perception that I had of you. Or, you know, like it just changes. Yeah, and we've done it like a little rough in some weeks where, you know, like things were supposed to be great. She was supposed to create content, but, you know, life happened. And so some months look chaotic, but we still release the podcast. And other weeks are like, yeah, we have weeks and weeks ahead of content because we batched a lot of stuff. And so it really depends, and not being like, we must do either this, like, you know, it doesn't need to look like you were saying, like your clients have months of batching content, but go with the seasons. If you feel like you're inspired, create as much as you want, leave it in as like a bank of content, but don't feel like you have to like stick to either like, oh, I planned this, and this for this month, so I must follow. And, you know, your motivation is not there, the quality is not there. Feel like with your seasons, like that can be such a great reminder, like messages from listeners, all of that.
I love that. Anna, this was so valuable. Thank you so much for joining me across these 4 episodes. I know that there's so much in here that people can just, I hope, like, I mean, I feel like I'd have like a whole notebook of notes if I was listening to this episode. So if you don't, maybe you should restart the entire series. No, I'm just kidding. Start from the beginning.
Yes, do it. That's actually something that I get like all the time. People will message me like, I listened to this episode 5 times. I could not take notes fast enough.
That's amazing. So tell us how many times it took you to take notes. No, tell us how many notes you took throughout this entire series. Message us on Instagram so we can hear it.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna, for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like we've touched on a lot of things. Listeners are just like, oh my gosh, let's go. I am ready. I'm inspired. Or I'm taking a break, because actually like a sabbatical sounds nice. So thank you for having me, Simona.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. And honestly, if you are taking a sabbatical now, planning on it, reach out to us. Let us know. Let us know how this episode inspired you in some way to shift maybe your mindset around how much content you actually have to create. So, and that's so amazing and so valuable. And I'm going to have you back. You're going to have to come back in 2024 and we can talk about so many things. There's so many other things we can talk about, consumption rates being one of them. Yeah, I'm so grateful for you. So thank you.
No, thank you. Your content is so fun. We went into so many different ways. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of As It Relates to Podcasting with my guest, Anna. All of her links can be found in the show notes below. Be sure to connect with her on social media. Say hello and connect with me so that I know what you loved from this conversation today. Thanks again so much. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe the show and share it with another creator that you know needs this help today. Okay, I'll see you on the flip side.